My own dear land, where'er my footsteps wander, ever to thee my heart still turns again. For thee my love grows ever fonder, fonder, till in its might it is akin to pain.
On the 29th of November 1944, on this isolated road southeast of Saint-Nazaire, France, 54 American, French and British prisoners of war were exchanged for captured Germans. One of the British prisoners was Michael Foote, a seriously wounded SAS captain. But only 6 days earlier, Foote's name was not on the German list of prisoners given to Andy Hodges, the American Red Cross representative handling negotiations for the Allies. Seeing the omission, Hodges requested that Foote be added to the list. The German commander refused. Foote had given them too much trouble. He had escaped several times. He simply knew too much. But Hodges persisted, demanding that the injured captain be included or the exchange was off. The German officer was incredulous. Would you sacrifice the freedom of all the other prisoners for one English officer? Standing to leave, Hodges replied, yes, for one English officer. It's all or none. The theatre of war could not have bound two men together from more different circumstances. Michael Richard Daniel Foote was the son of a prominent merchant, an army brigadier, Richard C. Foote, and his wife Nina.
I was born in London at the end of 1919 into what would have been called in the Habsburg monarchy eine Kaderfamilie. My father was proud of having two great-uncles, each of whom had been the professional head of the Navy. My father and my grandfather both fought all through the Great War. I spent a lot of my early childhood at my grandfather's house at Berkhamsted, and he lived in a large house with a lot of servants. I was brought up very strictly on the proverb that children are to be seen and not heard, and a lot of the time it was intensely dull.
Compared to the urbane Londoner, Andrew Jero Hodges was far removed not only by distance, but also by culture.
My father was in the livestock business. Mostly he dealt in mules and horses. I grew up in Geneva County, Alabama. I went to grammar school from the first through the fourth grade in Geneva, Alabama, and moved 12 miles away to Hartford, Alabama. I played football and basketball, and I was captain of the team in football.
Andrew earned a football scholarship to Howard College, a small Baptist school in Birmingham, Alabama. However, his promising football career was soon cut short by a shoulder injury sustained in a scrimmage. Undaunted by the loss of half his scholarship, Andrew worked his way through college, first with an athletic club and later selling burial policies door to door. Europe seemed far, far away. Michael won academic scholarships to Winchester College and New College, Oxford, but by now war clouds were gathering in Europe.
It had become quite clear to my generation by 1938 at the latest that we were quite shortly going to have another war in which it was quite clearly going to be our job to be junior officers in the armed forces and to go out and be shot at. And indeed, immediately after the end of my first Trinity term at Oxford, I was called up the Territorial Army anti-aircraft units, to one of which I belonged.
He would spend over 3 years peering skyward for enemy bombers. Hodges, however, had no such opportunity.
When the war started in Europe, I was still a member of the 104th Anti-Aircraft Unit. They called all the members of that group in for physical exam. I was notified after that I was 4F because of my shoulder, and they could not take me with our division.
In 1942, Michael Foote heard of an opening with Combined Operations Headquarters and jumped at the opportunity. He spent 18 months there participating in the planning of Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa. and Operation Husky in Sicily.
I'd already lost several friends who'd been killed, and I wanted to get, if I could, nearer the centre of what was going on. I was once allowed to go on a commando raid on condition I didn't go ashore. They seemed quite pleased with my work, and I was promoted major at the beginning of 44. I was then sent for by Ian Collins, who was one of the G1 plans, who congratulated me on being promoted major. Would I mind giving it up? He said, they want an intelligence officer. You seem to me to be just the man. I said, would it get me anywhere nearer the Germans? He said, certainly. I said, fine. That was that. It was a rule then, when you joined the Special Air Service, you gave up a rank. I believe it still is a rule.
Half a world away, across the Atlantic, Pearl Harbor had jolted the US from the isolationism that had enveloped America following World War I. Soon, her sons were fighting and dying overseas, while millions were being mobilized and trained.
It seemed that every day I'd go out to work, someone that had insurance with us had lost a son, either lost a husband or some dear friend. Anyway, I just got where I felt I had to do something for the war effort.
Leaving his young bride, Mary Louise, he volunteered for the American Red Cross. He was assigned to the 94th Infantry Division and eventually became its senior field director.
We were sent into New York City, and we were there for the purpose of boarding the Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth was a tremendous ship. We had 18,000 troops on that. If you can imagine a ship that's prepared for only 3,000 people, it was rather crowded.
On the 6th of August, 1944, the 94th Division arrived at the Firth of Clyde, Scotland. After 3 weeks of training in southwestern England, they sailed for France. On the 22nd of August, 1944, now Captain Michael Foote was infiltrated by the SAS into German lines north of Saint-Nazaire.
The brigadier had been to Brittany and come back, and I said, look here, so it isn't fair that you can go and I can't. He said, all right, you can now go. There's a job you can do in Brittany. There is a man called Bonner in the Sicherheitsdienst who is doing dreadful things to our prisoners. Dispose of him. Bring him back if you can. If he won't come back, shoot him. So I went to Brittany to dispose of Bonner. We were driving a car. Kaplan was driving. And we came to a broken bridge. While Kaplan was turning the car, I went up to see what was happening at the bridge. There was just a footway across it, which I went across, and I walked straight into a German machine gun nest. Half a dozen chaps who said to me, put your hands up.
Ironically, it was a German sergeant with a penchant for souvenirs who gave British Captain Michael Foote his first break shortly after capture. Seeing the SAS badge on his tunic, the sergeant took a penknife and snipped it off, thereby eliminating any visual connection between the prisoner and what Hitler termed the terror troops.
If he survived the war, the chap who cut those wings off is probably showing them to his grandson today as part of his collection of Allied insignia. But he saved my life, because there was a rule broadcast in October 42 that anybody in any Allied special force found behind the lines was either to be shot straight away or to be handed over to the Sicherheitsdienst for disposal later. And we all knew what that meant.
Following interrogation, he was escorted by a platoon of paratroopers to a prisoner of war camp on the Loire River in Saint-Nazaire.
A fortnight after being captured, I managed my first escape with a sapper captain called Goss, who got clean away. And luckily had memorized my father's peacetime address, wrote to my father, the letter reached my father met Goss and discovered that I was a prisoner of war after all.
By now, Patton's armoured force had broken out of Normandy and was turning east towards Paris. Only a few strong German garrisons were left occupying various key seaports. For weeks, American forces besieged the port of Brest, whose capture cost 10,000 American casualties.
We were responsible for the territories from Cherbourg down below Lorient. Most of the troops, the German troops, were around Lorient and St. Nazaire. We had 66,000 Germans we faced in that area. They were well equipped. They had guns, artillery guns that ranged from 20 millimeters up to 340. They had a lot of ammunition and didn't mind using it. So it caused a lot of problems for our group.
After the heavy losses in Brest, the 94th Division would not assault, but would only contain the German garrisons of Lorient and Saint-Nazaire.
On October 2nd, 1944, K Company, 3rd Platoon, was sent upon a mission to obtain German prisoners for interrogation.
We were told that there were some Germans down a certain distance who wanted to surrender.
When we left that morning to go out on that patrol to pick up the Germans, we had no idea that we would meet any resistance. And when we got out to where we were supposed to pick them up, there was nobody there. And the radio back to the captain, "There's no one here." And he says, "Well, just keep going till you find somebody."
And the patrol consisted of 55 men. We went down the slopes of that area, and it was a sort of nervous type of thing. We saw French farmers that scurried out of the way as we came down.
This was all hedgerow country with no man's land in between the German line, which was ill-defined, and our own.
And we arrived at a plateau just before the town of Lorient. We started walking in the meadows, and suddenly there was a shot rang out.
I was serving as a scout, which is one of the leading people in the column. Another fellow was ahead of me, and he was shot immediately.
So I said, let's go back. The machine gun had us pinned down where we were now, and the only place we had to go was back, so we went back.
And we started back to our lines and found out that the Germans had surrounded us.
We had nowhere to go. We were just trapped in the hedgerow.
Leaning up against the hedgerow and watching the bullets going in the ground around my feet, I thought, man, he's going to cut my legs off.
The machine gun opened up, and the row was really dead.
We were firing over hedgerows, and they were firing back at us.
They sent in another company to relieve us to get out.
They pretty soon radioed in and said the reinforcements were there, but they couldn't get through.
I think we were hit around 12 o'clock, and we were in constant combat until about 6.
Somehow or other I had to stop these people. So I crawled out from behind one of the hedgerows, crawled about 20 feet with Corporal Atkinson, and we called for time fire in a better position. As those shots rang out, we hit them exactly where we should have. They lost many men, but they pulled back. So we suddenly had a period of relief.
When the mortar shells was coming in, you couldn't hear them coming down, but you could see, when they hit and see the smoke and explosion and all that stuff.
The mortar hit right over here. It went blown up on the ground, and I fell on the ground, on the dirt.
I never heard it hit. I never felt anything. I didn't know anything.
It was bleeding. I was dazed. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't fight.
I was laying face down, raised up and looked around. I'm not dead. Bernie was hit worse than I was.
I was lying there and thinking to myself that I was dying.
The Germans were bringing in more and more reserves. Our own patrol was a long distance away, and we were being threatened continuously. The rifle ammunition was running out.
We did have 5 killed, probably 20, 25 men wounded to various degrees.
The lieutenant said to me, call the colonel and told him we have to give up. I did that. The colonel was reluctant, but eventually said, go ahead. Wave a white flag and go out there. Corporal Atkinson broke out his bandage, put it on the tip of his bayonet, and walked out. A machine gunner way back didn't hear what was going on and literally cut Atkinson in half. It was one of the most frightening things to see, a man with 30, 40 bullets in his groin.
After that, Sergeant Harrington asked me, since I did know some German, to say we wanted to surrender. They instructed us to drop our weapons and put our arms up in the air and come out single file, which we did.
I asked Boyd, my friend, to get my dog tags out and put them into the ground.
He's a Jewish boy. I took his dog tags off and buried them for him so the Germans wouldn't know he was a Jew. And we started walking out. And I was helping him, he was helping me.
While the wounded were taken to German military hospitals, the other survivors of the K Company patrol were shipped to Île-le-Roi, which is an island 5 miles from the submarine base at Lorient.
The island was 5-6 miles long and roughly 1.5 miles wide in the widest spot. The Germans had something like a garrison of 3,000 men out there.
Then he took us up to the fort on Île-de-Roi, and that's where we were imprisoned.
We had 2 large rooms there where there were bunk beds, no toilet facilities or anything like that.
The ticks were infested with fleas, and so you'd feel very crawly all night long, but you slept because you were tired.
I don't recall getting more than 2 showers out there. Inside and outside temperature were practically the same. We were captured, for the most part, wearing fatigues and field jackets and not geared up for winter wear.
We had 1 slice of white bread and cut that in half, and that's the slice of bread that we have all day. We had ersatz coffee in the morning and some kind of lard, and then at night we had some soup that was just plain water, hot water boiling. I lost, I think, probably 35 pounds, 45 days.
They needed water. We didn't have a well there, so you'll get water. And we soon found out that it was best if we could volunteer to go do some of these things, because the French were very cooperative. If they would see us and could get an opportunity, they'd give us food.
Bon, c'était le puits où les prisonniers de guerre venaient s'alimenter en eau, accompagnés d'une sentinelle allemande, et on habitait juste à côté, une petite maison de pêcheurs. On attendait que la sentinelle avait dépassé un peu, quoi, pour rien voir. On leur donnait ce qu'on pouvait, quoi, des pommes de terre, des œufs, même à la pêche, je me rappelle une fois, mes parents m'avaient donné. Et puis bon, et chaque fois qu'on les voyait, c'est ce que l'on faisait pour les aider, quoi. Ils avaient faim.
From the prison on Île-le-Roi, an American POW took matters in hand. On the 12th of October 1944, Sergeant James Sarsfield from the coal mining section of Pennsylvania scribbled a plea for help to the American Red Cross.
October 1944, I was asked to report to the office of our Chief of Staff, Colonel Earl Berquist. When I got there, they told me the problem that they had encountered was about prisoners being held on 2 of the islands off from Lorient and around St. Nazaire, and they did not feel they were getting proper food, clothing, medical supplies. They showed me some letters that they had gotten, I assume, from the French underground. I don't know. I was simply told by General Maloney, the Colonel and I feel this is your job and not ours. See what you can do about it. I left there, wondering how in the world I could contact Germans in the area, not speaking German.
Hodges promptly wrote the German commander requesting permission to deliver supplies for the Allied prisoners of war. A few days later, the Germans responded.
The message was received by recon that some Germans were waiting for someone from our division to come over.
On the 28th of October, Hodges sailed across the Etel River. He entered Le Magur, a small fishing village held by the Germans. It faced the American-controlled town of Etel.
There were 2 German officers, well-dressed, and one was Captain Reich, and the other one was a fellow by the name of Schmidt. They agreed that I could bring in supplies. I'd asked that I personally deliver those supplies. They refused that request. Schmidt made a statement, I give you my word of honor as a German officer that every article that you bring in, if you have a list of them, will be signed by an American officer and an American enlisted man. And so they made that arrangement, and then we had dinner. My man was waiting for me on the old sailboat, and we went back.
We heard rumors that maybe the Red Cross was trying to get us some help, but we had no evidence that was occurring until we actually did get some Red Cross stuff. I think we had old Henry candy bars and cigarettes and some clothes.
In all, I think there were 13 trips that I made in the Etel area to talk with or take supplies in. In about the 4th time, I said, you know, this is foolish in a way. I said, why don't you just give us all those American, British, and French POWs, I can assure you they will not be permitted to fight in this theater, and you won't have to house them, you won't have to clothe them, you won't have to feed them. And Smith said, well, are you proposing an exchange? I said, would you be amenable to exchange? They came back and said, well, we'd have to contact our commanding officer. I said, well, you contact him, I'll contact my commanding officer, I'll contact the International Red Cross, and then I'll be back over and I'll set a time to come back. It was a very happy time when I found that they had approved it, and I got back, and of course Berkowitz and Maloney were delighted that we'd gotten everything all set up, so we arranged for a meeting on November the 16th, 1944.
The prisoners would be ferried by boat across the river between Etel and La Magoure during an unprecedented 6-hour truce.
We gradually heard the additional rumor that we'd be repatriated back to our lines. We didn't understand quite the word repatriated, but it was a good thing for us. We'd get back to our own lines and hopefully have some food.
The night before they said we're leaving at 5:30 in the morning, I think, or it was early, it was still dark, because we had to walk down to the port, go across by boat, and get on buses and drive to Etel. We drove in there, and of course there were a lot of German soldiers there. We unloaded the buses, and it wasn't very long till a boat came across the river with the American officers in it. Landed, they immediately greeted some German officers and exchanged, well, I think you'd call them pleasantries.
All of our troops, they had them lined up, the Americans, and you'd be amazed what they asked. One wanted to know who won the World Series, and the other wanted to know who was elected president. And then we went into a little cafe and went through all the agreement again. They insisted that the Germans they brought back in realized that they had to fight in that theater, and some of them refused to fight. So the German officer, Borsch, made a statement to the Chief of Staff, Berkowitz, and he said, I'm sorry, we can't exchange, but about 50-something. And Berkowitz spoke up, Colonel, he said, a good officer is never without good reserves. And he turned around to one of the American officers, go out and bring us in some more of the German men. They did, and they finally, the German doctor approved those, and we were all set for the exchange.
The Americans started to check us out to see who we were and who was there and so forth. And after these lists or whatever they had were agreed to, they started loading the wounded into the boats.
A boatload of Americans would be taken across to Etel and unloaded, and then picked up a load of German prisoners, and about 12 or 14 to a boatload, I guess.
I think we made 5 trips in all. We were able to get all 79 in the 5 trips.
My captain came to me and said to me, Bernie, how are you? How are you? And it was great. He cried.
When we came back, I think one of the happiest group of men that I've ever seen were the prisoners. There was a little boy in there, and they said he was 17. When he got up to ground level, he leaned down and kissed the ground. I never shall forget that.
Word of the exchange spread around the United States. Articles and photos from New York to Los Angeles trumpeted the event. The Red Cross was elated, describing the exchange as unparalleled. And the army wanted to see if Hodges could work his magic again to free Allied prisoners in German-held Saint-Nazaire. The prison camp at Saint-Nazaire was a dreary affair, bounded on the south by the Loire River and to the east by wide marshes and canals. It was here that SAS Captain Michael Foote was imprisoned with over 50 Allied fighting men. Foote became close friends with a French army officer, Lieutenant Léon Rollin.
J'ignorais l'existence d'une poche À Saint-Nazaire, personne ne m'avait averti, il n'y avait personne sur les routes. Et je me suis brusquement trouvé encerclé par 2 voitures militaires allemandes qui m'ont stoppé et qui m'ont fait prisonnier en quelque sorte. J'étais très étonné, je ne m'attendais pas à ça. Alors là, j'ai été versé au camp. J'avais une certaine inquiétude comme juge en tant que partisan, autrement dit qu'on mette fin à ma vie tout de suite. Mais il s'est trouvé que la poche était fermée et que les Allemands commençaient à penser à ce qui les attendait après la guerre. Donc, ils m'ont traité en prisonnier de guerre et non pas en partisan.
Sergeant Harold Thompson, an Alabamian with the 83rd Division, was also a prisoner in Saint-Nazaire. A patrol leader at 19, his outfit had been ambushed. Only Thompson and 3 others survived.
I volunteered to lead 6 covert missions behind the German lines to determine this, gun emplacements, troop strength, what type of weapons they had. On my 6th mission, I was not successful in returning. This was on the 13th of September, 1944.
Second Lieutenant James Silver from Massachusetts was the senior American officer at the Saint-Nazaire camp. A pilot at the ripe age of 22, Silver was flying reconnaissance on the right flank of Patton's army with the 160th Tactical Recon Squadron.
East of Saint-Nazaire, I got hit by anti-aircraft fire, and the plane caught fire, and I had to bail out. This was my first and only experience with a parachute jump. When I hit the ground, I could hear gunfire, so I gathered up my chute quickly and started heading for the hedgerow, which was around the field, and I finally dove over the hedgerow. About this time, I realized they weren't shooting at me. It was my ammunition in the airplane that was going off in the fire. And I looked up and saw 2 Germans up the path about 40 feet away. One of them was leveling a rifle at me, so I looked around, made a quick decision that I didn't think I had time to run, so I put my hands up and got up. And it's a good thing, because while I was doing all this, the German had slipped down the other side of the hedgerow, and he was only about 10 or 15 feet from me. They took me to the camp in Saint-Nazaire, and on the way, people in the shop windows would flash a V sign at me, and I would smile and nod back at them. I met the members of the camp, and there were 19 Americans and 3 British and 1 Frenchman.
The camp was a cold, Spartan place with few comforts and poor food.
We had double bunks, straw mattresses, bug infested, no heat, no bathroom facilities. We were allowed to write 1 letter a week home, not exceeding 20 lines. My parents never received one of those letters. And once the French Red Cross found out we were in this camp as POWs, a male and a female Red Cross representative from France came and visited us. And I took a little piece of paper and I wrote on it my parents' address. And I said, I am okay. And that French lady mailed that, and my parents received it.
Thompson still recalls the cold nights and the one hopeful sound that pierced the gloom, the warm tenor voice of British sapper George Tegg of Birmingham, England.
Every night when the lights were turned out, he would sing Danny Boy. Until this day, that song just kind of tears me out of the frame.
Oh, Danny boy, the pipes are calling, from glen to glen and down the mountainside. The summer's gone and all the flowers are dying.
In the POW officers' quarters, escape was the main topic of conversation. Captain Foote was eager to give it another try.
It was my duty as an officer to escape. Some, like me, were raring to go, anxious to press on with escapes. Others were jolly pleased not to be being shot at anymore, and quite happy to stay where they were.
We would do things like time the guard, how long it took him to walk up and down his beat to see if we had time to get out in between and all that sort of thing. And so we had a few unsuccessful attempts because they really weren't that well planned and didn't get the good opportunity.
We were walking up and down the Maidan, the main parade ground, of the camp one day when a lorry arrived and the cheval de frise at the gate was drawn open and the lorry came in and went over to the kitchen. I nudged Leo, and without altering our pace, we turned round and simply walked straight out of the camp. We hadn't gone 100 yards before we met the commandant coming back the other way, who pulled a pistol on us and said, "Salute, salute."
Foote and Spannin returned for a period of solitary confinements.
Là-dessus, on a passé ensemble le mois de septembre, jour et nuit, le mois d'octobre, jour et nuit, et on a décidé de nous échapper en novembre.
A Dakota was shot down not far from us, and 3 of the crew of 4 of the Dakota came to join us in the camp. One of them was Keller, who was the senior American officer in the camp. Norelius, his navigator, was another. And by this time, we had been moved into huts inside an empty factory building.
The Germans had become annoyed at our escape attempts before, and they built this house in there and put a fence around it.
Keller, at roll call one night, managed to fudge with the keys. He happened to be in the latrine at nightfall when we were all shut in. Came back having missed evening roll call, which Norelius had answered for him with 2 voices in the gloom of the hut. The German hadn't bothered to count properly. And brought with him the keys of the hut.
The Germans had a habit of celebrating once in a while and drinking and singing, and so this was a good night to pick to make the escape.
At midnight, Leo and I got out with no difficulty, followed 10 minutes later by Keller and Norelius.
John Hill and I were going to leave. By the time the 4 of them got out, there were enough noise so that the Germans were alerted. They came rushing in. They were very excited. They closed us in our room. They locked the building.
We heard a hubbub behind us. We simply clambered over a 14-foot, not very well put up barbed wire fence and got out into the open. When Aurelius and Keller went one way and Leo and I went the other, we got clean out of the camp. Another wonderful night for escaping. Drenching rain.
On a choisi une direction, mais on n'a pas pu prendre un chemin, une route. On a traversé le terrain de tourbe, donc on était obligé de passer à travers les ruisseaux partout. On était complètement mouillé, on a marché comme ça 1 ou 2 heures probablement.
In the suburbs of Nazaire, again we stumbled on a sentry who said, "Who the hell are you?" To which Rollin replied, in impeccable German with an upper-class accent, "How dare you talk to an officer in that tone of voice? Stand to attention to speak to me." The chap said, "So fair," clicked his heels, and we went on. We came to a farmhouse exactly as described in the escape books. No sign of a telephone, no sign of a motor vehicle, no sign of enemy occupation. We found an open window, let ourselves in. We turned out to have let ourselves into the main bedroom. Monsieur lit a candle and said, "Who the hell are you?" And I left it to Leo with his perfect right to do all the explaining, and he explained we were 2 prisoners of war in escape, looking for somewhere dry to spend the night if we possibly could. He let out a bellow, and his 2 sons came in, wielding pitchforks, hit me on the forehead and hit me again on the neck as I fell, cut Leo badly about the face.
Il est tombé inanimé, j'ai eu très peur. J'ai compris que peut-être il avait été tué ou non. J'ai compris que je ne peux pas laisser comme ça.
Leo, bless his heart, carried me away over his shoulder, out through the window. I, by this time, was unconscious. Took me down a track from the farm till he found a haystack to put me in. Went on till he found some Germans.
Je suis tombé sur quelques soldats russes en uniforme allemand. Je leur ai expliqué, en tout cas ils ont compris ce qui s'est passé. Ils ont pris donc soin de Foote, ils ont ramené chez les Allemands par voie, j'espère, par voie médicale. Et moi, ils m'ont rendu aux Allemands directement. Le lendemain matin, ils m'ont ramené au camp.
Michael was taken to a military hospital in La Baule near Saint-Nazaire. The American escapees made it to freedom.
After the first exchange, a few days, maybe a week or 10 days, I was asked to have dinner with General Maloney and Chief Staff Berquist. And they mentioned the fact that they had Brigadier Foote coming in from London, whose son was a prisoner of war in the St. Nazaire area. And during the dinner, I had said something to him, asked about his occupation before the war, or if he had always been a career officer, and he said no. He says, for about 10 years I cut out and I worked for a bakery. And he says, my largest account was with R.H. Macy's in New York, to whom I sold pumpkin pies. Then he asked the question if I would be willing to go in and try to get his son out. And I told him I would not, but I would try to get all the prisoners, Allied prisoners in that area.
On Thanksgiving Day, without advance warning but with Red Cross flags flying, Andy Hodges drove into German lines east of Saint-Nazaire, where he was stopped at a barricade by enemy infantry. Hodges soon met a lieutenant who blindfolded him and took him on a 3-hour trip, part by torpedo boat, across the Loire. When his blindfold was removed, he found himself in a small room at German headquarters. Across the table, he was faced by 4 high-ranking German officers. Their discussions quickly centered on the prisoner exchange. The Germans had received good reports on Hodges' success at Lorient. They presented him with a list of Allied prisoners. Hodges quickly noted that the names of 2 Americans and a British captain were not on the list.
I looked at the list and I told them, I said, all the names are not on this list of the prisoners you're supposed to have. And they said, why, how do you know that? I said, well, 2 of them are Americans. One of them spoke up and said, those 2 men escaped last night. And said, you'll know about it when you get back to your unit, I would think. I said, we'll check that out. And then the other one, they said, do you know who that is? And I said, yes. I told him it was Michael on foot. And then he said, well, foot is not for exchange. And I said, why? And he said, well, he's tried to escape on 4 or 5 different occasions. He knows too much. He's the best horse in the lot. We just can't trade him. And I said, well, we're wasting our time because it's all or none. We can't just take one. The German officer said, you mean you'd sacrifice the lives of all these other men for one English officer? And I said, yes, or for one French private. And then he mentioned the fact foot would be a very high price. And I said, well, what's a high price? And so he said, well, it'd be 5 majors of the Iron Cross of the neck. And that's when I said, you know, I don't understand this. And they said, what don't you understand? I said, the fact that here you talked about the German people, how important, what good military people they were and all, and yet are you telling me that one British officer is worth all 5 of your German majors? The German jumped up, hit the table 3 times and said, 9-9, let him have his captain. I said, on a 1-for-1 basis? He says, yeah.
The exchange was set for the 29th of November, 1944. It was decided that hostilities would be temporarily suspended and a ceasefire would be observed to facilitate the exchange. When made aware of Foot's serious physical condition, Hodges wanted to make sure that the English officer was in fact alive and could stand the trip to American lines.
All that I can remember of that hospital is being shaken out of a coma by somebody who said to me in German, wake up, there's an officer come to speak with you. And I can see at the foot of my bed somebody dressed as a junior United States officer, but there was something fishy about him. Tried to have a closer look so I could see what was fishy about him. Instead of having crossed rifles or crossed guns on his lapels, he had 2 little red crosses.
I had to approach him from his back, and I leaned over and I told him my mission. Nothing happened. I went over it again the second time. Nothing happened.
I thought this must be a Gestapo plant. God knows what they're going to get out of me, but anyhow, I much mistrusted this man.
I thought about what his father said, and I leaned over and said, I once knew a man by the name of Foot, and he sold pumpkin pies to R.H. Macy's in New York. I noticed those eyes were opening. He opened his eyes, and I went over the mission one more time.
So I tried to ease up and talk to him a bit.
And the only thing he said was, do you think I can make it? And I said, sure you can. We'll have the best medical attention on the continent for you.
An appropriately decorated German officer to volunteer as exchange for Foot proved extremely difficult to locate. Only one agreed, Kapitänleutnant Karl Wilhelm Walter Müller, former commander of a torpedo boat flotilla.
When the Americans or the British captured a German officer, the officer was flown over to England, so if the unit was overrun, they wouldn't have the knowledge of that officer to work with. They were supposed to fly an officer in for exchange of Foot. And the day of the exchange, we had an overcast. We kept waiting, and we saw and found the overcast would not lift, so I had the problem of going in and talking with the Germans again. And I just went in and told them exactly what had happened. I said, I will personally be responsible for bringing that officer in as soon as we can get him in from England. And so they were just as nice about it, did not question it. They just said, we'll be glad to do that. So I went back, and then that's when we marked off the area that we would use. And in the pictures, you'll see the Germans going one way and the Americans the other.
From the American lines, a group of captured Nazis marched toward an agreed-upon meeting place. Arrangements have been made with the German commander for an exchange of prisoners. And from behind the enemy lines, a similar group of captured Allied troops converges on the rendezvous. Formal negotiations for the exchange are held as the two columns wait impatiently for release to their own forces. The Nazi officers reach an agreement with the Red Cross representative, Andy Hodges, and other Allied officials. At the conclusion, what looks like a small riot turns out to be a joyful celebration. Smiling and confident, they are ready to witness the serious business of stemming the Nazi tide.
I remember nothing at all about having been exchanged, because when I next came round, that I recall at all, I came out of a very deep coma indeed. So deep a coma that I just knew that I was alive, and that was all. Of about 100 members of SAS who were taken prisoner, only 6 came back. By a colossal stroke of luck, I was one of the 6.
Foot was awarded the French Croix de Guerre for his efforts in Brittany. He did recover, but not enough to return to active duty. He did occasional odd jobs for Combined Operations Headquarters. Meanwhile, by Christmas, trust had solidified between Hodges and his German counterparts.
Just before Christmas time, when our division was ready to move for the Battle of the Bulge, I was notified that the Germans had captured 15, I think it was, of our troops. I went down and again crossed over to their side, made arrangements for the exchange, and that exchange was made after our division moved up for the Battle of the Bulge, and it was handled by several of our officers in the 94th Division.
The success of Hodges' efforts created a climate for further cooperation between the combatants. At Lorient, following the Etel exchange, Oberleutnant Schmidt negotiated with the French Red Cross for an exchange of 31 French soldiers and 9 members of the resistance for an equal number of Germans. By the end of 1944, through Hodges' efforts in Lorient and St. Nazaire, all Allied prisoners had been freed. The Red Cross proclaimed the exchanges a first among firsts.
I don't know of any other case of a prisoner of war exchange organized and seen through by a single man, as Hodges did that one. Not in this war. Earlier it was commonplace, but during the war against the Axis it was not at all normal.
The garrisons at Lorient and St. Nazaire held out until after the German collapse in May 1945. They would be the last Germans to surrender to the Allies. Michael Foot enrolled at New College, Oxford as a scholar and later taught history there and at the University of Manchester. He became a leading authority on World War II resistance movements and on escape and evasion. Andy Hodges, or Jero as he's known in Alabama, retired after a successful career in insurance. He remains active in the National Scouting Movement and local civic affairs. He is a trustee emeritus of Samford University in Birmingham, formerly Howard College, the Baptist school where he once was a football hopeful. It is said that courage has many faces. 149 Allied soldiers and airmen, the former prisoners of Lorient and St. Nazaire, are glad that courage had the face of Andy Hodges.
I have never seen Hodges before the day we came here. Thank you so much what you did that. That was greatest things for us. Maybe we could have died, but he did it for us.
Yes, I look on beyond earth's limitation to where a home of rarer vision gleams, fairer than earth's most wonderful creation, bathed in the light of heaven's own morning beams. There we shall meet from every clime and nation. There we shall meet in answer to the call. There we shall meet in joyous consecration. Sons of one Father,